Yeah, I think it's. I mean, it's there's the way I think about it. There's professions and there's careers, right? This is a profession. This is what we do. Okay. Um, do you the concept that always comes up is work life balance, right? Okay. And when when I was traveling overseas, I realized that a lot of my friends overseas they work to live. Okay, where a lot of us over here live to work. Okay. Um, I don't look at what I do as again. I think a common concept here is I love what I do, and I was fortunate enough to get into something I love to do. So therefore, it's not as much work as maybe other people from the outside see it as. Okay, I'm not going to sugarcoat it at all. All right, which is why I kind of alluded to the time you're already taking to get into neurosurgery. Okay, as being substantial, but I think the people that say that did not aren't necessarily loving what they're doing. Now, granted, there are a lot of pressures from the outside. When you're in training, you're sheltered from them. Okay, when you're in training, you are to do what you are told to do and learn, right? And that goes across everything. Okay, when you leave the cocoon, all right, you're going to get the pressures of financing, publish or perish, right? All those other things that are going on that weren't necessarily the big deal for you. And I think if you are appropriately mentored, I guess another common theme today, and you learn how to, you know, is it create a routine or can address those different concepts of of patient care, of when do you exercise, do you find time to relax and do those appropriately, then you're okay. But you know, and I guess I'll address this, and maybe it's not the right. It's just not too PC, but I mean from a female standpoint, right? It comes up all the time. All right, we get that. We're not supposed to ask that when when we're applying, or when you're applying as a female resident. We're not supposed to mention family. Okay, but no one in this room can't tell me that that doesn't cross your mind if you're a female going into a profession that requires you to be in the hospital for 13 hours a day. That's just asinine to say that's not going to be the case. All right, and are you going to make different choices based on your career in neurosurgery than your colleague that's a teacher? Yeah, you will. Okay, but I think generally speaking, you have to know you want to do it regardless of who you are. Okay, and enjoy it. And I'll add one little piece to that. We've had residents that we fired in their 6th year. Okay, so they had one more year to go, and we got rid of them. That's our fault. All right, we saw people that weren't going to work, and we know they're not working by year 3. They know they're not working by year 3. Okay, you got to be honest with yourself, but it's not going to work, and move on. So, short answer to your question is yes, it's a time commitment. Days are 13 hours ish, 6 days a week. Okay, but I can get out and come here, right? Because I like to do this. All right. I spent 10 days. I was in London and Spain, going to parties with my friends 2 weeks ago. I'm living, right? Right. So, and I get 2 kids.
Anybody else?
Right.
And he's got 2 kids.
Well, just comment, no matter what you do, there's a certain percentage time spent in different types of activities. And if you go into a surgical field such as neurosurgery, you need to spend a certain amount of time in the operating room, and you have to enjoy that. As you pointed out, people who do it love it and have a good time at it, and it's perfectly fine. It just. And if you want to be good as a neurosurgeon, you can't do it just an hour every other week. I mean, you have to keep doing it in order to keep your skills up.
Right.
Right? So it takes a fair amount of time to actually do that. So you have to decide how you want to organize your career. Do you want to spend a lot of time doing that particular thing or not? And that's fine for some people, and it's not for others. And I think that's really the main decision in relation to a field like neurosurgery, as opposed to, well, it's the same thing for any surgical field as opposed to a medical field. It isn't only neurology, neurosurgery, but so it depends upon how you like spending your time when you're working. I think that's the basic thing.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely fair.
I would add one thing to that, and I hear this a lot from undergraduates that I advise, that, you know, they're afraid of going into something because they think they may be getting in over their head. But that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. You know, I think too much of the time we worry about failure as being a bad thing. But, you know, if you're interested in pursuing something and you think you're interested in pursuing it, try it out. You know, you'll figure it out at some point that it may not be for you. And that's not a bad thing. It's not like it's going to keep you from doing anything else. You can go ahead and try it, and you might get to a point where it's not for you anymore, and you'll have to change your path, and that's okay. You know, I think everybody said they had a meandering path to some respects, and that's okay. So don't be afraid to, if right now you think that's the way you want to go, don't be scared off by somebody saying, well, that's, you know, by giving you the big picture sort of idea about things. Go ahead and follow it up and see how it works for you, and you might find that you have this love for it, and those other things might just go to the wayside. You also might find that it's not for you, and that's fine too. There's no problem. There's nothing wrong with doing that.
I'll add one. I think you have to be careful. I mentor students a lot, residents a lot, okay? And I went through the same process you did. I encountered a lot of negative people, okay? And I've gotten to the point where I think human nature is kind of negative, and you got to fight to be positive, all right? And I said I was not going to be negative. I find myself doing that sometimes, right? You have to at this point in your time, get as many opinions as you can get, balance them out, okay? And you know, listen, but you have to take it with a grain of salt a little bit, because you can catch somebody where they just had to deal with the insurance companies about getting a procedure done or something like that, and they're in a bad mood, okay? So, but take it with a grain of salt, but expose yourself to it, okay? Spend and part of that time investment up front to know you're going to do this for the rest of your life is you know, get spring breaks, Christmas breaks. Those are the times where you take that time off to go and shadow or interact or, you know, talk. So it's back to that whole communication, networking that I think is important to do up front. So.
Another question? Okay, so I have, oh yes, go ahead.
This question is directed at Dr. Hallett, Dr. Welch. I wanted to know what made you choose an academic over a community physician career?
Right. So I think that in terms of choosing an academic path is because I was always interested in trying to figure out how things work and looking at things from a research point of view. I think I never really considered routine clinical practice as full-time. On the other hand, I enjoy seeing patients, and I like to take care of them, and that's sort of a fun thing to do. So choosing clinical research has been a good way of marrying those two things. So I still have the opportunity to see patients, look after them, have fun with that particular aspect of things, and still can have a lot of interesting challenges and try to figure out what's going on with each individual patient. I had one mentor who was a particularly influential person in my life when I was a neurology resident. His name was C. Miller Fisher. And he used to have the attitude that he would never leave a patient encounter without asking a new question and trying to learn something new from that person. And I think that you can learn lots of things if that's the interest that you have in terms of how the brain works and why people do certain things and things of that sort. There were a lot of other people that didn't like that particular style. He had a nickname which was called shifting dullness. And a lot of people thought that he would just sort of stand at the patient's bedside and shift from one foot to the other, back and forth, asking questions, trying to think. He would say things like, now let's see, what can I do to figure out why the nervous system would do that? And so I think that that's the sort of, in a sense, the sort of attitude I have, trying to figure out things. That's what drove me in this direction in the first place. But being able to see patients and do the clinical research is a terrific marriage.
I would echo that, and another, I guess, direct comment on that is I dealt with a lot of community neurosurgeons in my training that I would never want to emulate. Right. So, you learn the good ways and the bad ways, and I did see at one point that you got to a point in when you're not constantly challenged where you stagnate, and when you're teaching, you're constantly challenged, and there are sacrifices you make for that, but there are gains you make for that, and so I consider myself fortunate to be at a in a place where I can do what I want to do and learn from it, and that's a pretty good marriage. So that's my take.
Yes. Jerry?
I guess I'll go. I think finding someone that gets interested in what I do, I get a thrill out of that. I'm not saying that the science experiments are boring in the lab, but they get to be pretty automatic for a while, and then there are periods of bright discovery. But when the students come through and I tell them the way that we can put in these proteins and affect these circuits, and I always kind of pretend like it's not there yet, but we could have buttons and we could push a mouse and get it going through a maze the way we want. That's the kind of thing I think is just really exciting. And then the fact that you can see that discovery, because I told you I had my light bulb moment. I don't know why certain things turn us on and not others. I don't know why it's that. For me, it was the first neuron I recorded from. I think the problem is, like, those are all great questions, but I think a lot of people study certain things for the wrong reasons, for making money or this or that. It's important that you are afraid of the work, yes, but I always worry that people don't do something that they would love to do because they think it's too hard. So when I get and see people like you who, out of 20 people, there are only going to be a couple that really love what I do, but that's fine if I get just one or two. So for me, knowing that I have an effect down the line helps me feel, if I'm a little bit feel like the ones that I appreciate that help me, that helps me work harder. Because it's not just discovering how the brain works, it's training the next cohort of people to do what I do. And that's giving back. So I just feel fortunate that I can do that if I can have an impact on others that people helped me through. So that's just a big thrill for me when I see that. So that's why I think a mentor helps me keep going when you have the inevitable administrative roadblocks, which we all have every day.
Yeah, I echo that. I mean, that's really the fun part of what I do is teaching students and mentoring them. And I get to see students go off, a few of them go off to grad school. I actually never recommend grad school to people. There's some that I just see that they're excited about science, and I try to encourage that. A lot of people go on to MDs as well. And so I never tell anyone what to do, but I think for me as a mentor, I try to see what they enjoy and just try to kind of give them advice to get them where they need to go. And so it's really a fun part of what I do. I have to say I had the same experience because I'm a neurophysiologist by training, but mine was a leech neuron. And it was the same. Yeah, it's the same thing. It was the same impression, right? It changed my world when I saw this first action potential. And so, for me, mentoring is just a huge part of what I do, and it really keeps me going because I found in science, I could get into things of like, I don't even know why I'm doing this anymore, and none of my experiments are working. And because I have students, I'm actually training students to learn how to do science. And that brings on a whole new perspective for me and excitement for me. And so that keeps me interested. What I'll do in 5 years, who knows? It's still fun, it's still meandering.
There's one other point which I think is nice in this regard. That is trying to answer all the questions that people might ask. So you think you understand something, and someone asks you a question, well, why is that? You say, well, let's say I thought I knew, but maybe I don't actually know, or maybe there's a point of it that I can't explain, and so I think that that's a very helpful aspect. I mean, not only is it fun, we've already heard about it being fun, but it's also educational in that sense that often a question coming from somebody will point out a hole in your own thinking, or perhaps even a new direction of thought that you could do because it's someone coming with a fresh view of things. So I think that having people around who are younger and haven't thought about it as much is also a valuable part of the scientific enterprise. So I think that that's a nice thing. In terms of the future, I think probably most of us on the panel love the sort of work that we're doing and hope that we can just continue to do it. There's always a continuous set of questions. I mean, you solve one problem, and it creates, and then you identify 3 more in the process. So it just keeps going along. So in any event, at my age, I'm not going to change course.
Anyone else on that one? Stephen?
Say one other thing. So, I mean, for me, one of the most rewarding things about mentoring is when you get a student who comes back and and the student has far surpassed anything that you had expected out of that student, or even surpassed you. I've had a couple of students who are now, just really going gangbusters in research, and it's a great thing to see, because you think back to that student who sort of came to you thinking, well, I'm not sure if I want to do this, and I'm not sure I can do this. And then you see them, after they leave, they go off and they just completely flourish. I think that's one of the most rewarding things. Sometimes more rewarding than finding something out scientifically is knowing that, that this person's going to go on and really excel and probably go beyond even what you're going to do yourself is a great feeling, and it's very rewarding. I don't have an answer to the what I'm going to do in 5 years either. But I didn't have that answer. You could have asked me 5 years before I got my graduate degree. I didn't have an answer then either, and so that's the great fun of it.
Anybody else with fun?
Yeah, I think good mentors make good mentors, right? I think, and I've been fortunate enough to have them, therefore, and I feel somewhat obligated to do for others what they did for me. So I think that's part of it for me. I think I'm observing a phenomenon. I'm 44, right? So I'm watching people hit their late 40s and trying to figure out what's next. A lot.
Just keep getting better, though.
Yeah,
Just know that.
yeah, a lot. Yeah. So
Keep getting better.
but in clinical medicine, which I think you see a lot of people are looking for MPHs, or do I need to do an MBA and all this other type of stuff. And I just like what I do too much. I'll call an MBA if I need MBA advice, right? So, and a lot of times in academic medicine, which are you going to do a chairmanship or something like that? And I'm
Resist.
yeah, it's the administrative work of that is just chairmans aren't what chairmans used to
Not
be.
as much fun.
I don't think. I think you're so bogged down in administrative work you can't do what you want to do. So that's
So you
my
hear that from everybody, the administrator stuff.
yeah. It just eats you up. So
Any other questions? Okay, yes?
This question is mainly for Dr. Joyner. Did you go straight into your PhD after your bachelor's, or did you have any experience in industry? What has kept you more research and academic side of going into the industry of medical engineering or finding jobs on those?
Right. So I realized, having sat through most of the talks, that my talk didn't really give a path of like how I got to where I am. So I apologize for that. So I did go straight to graduate school. I went to St. Louis University. Then I went straight to Johns Hopkins to get my PhD. I didn't really meander that much. I know I'm like the huge outlier, I guess, but I knew. So I talked about. No, that's absolutely not true either. But I focused on one mentor, my postdoc mentor, while I was here. But I had an excellent mentor in undergrad. He's the one who actually said you should go to graduate school. Let me call my friend at Johns Hopkins and see if you want to do a summer there, basically. So the summer between my junior year and senior year, I spent at Hopkins, and that's how I got to know the department and the kind of research, and that's why I applied, and that's probably a good reason why I got accepted. I knew from my mentor and the instructors I had at St. Louis University in undergrad that I really wanted to do research and I really wanted to teach. So that's why I went to an academic institution to get my PhD. My postdoc here was again focused on research, but one of the things that I was missing, which I didn't talk about, which I should have, one of the things I was missing while I was here was teaching. So when I talked about Dr. Wirtz giving me the opportunities to succeed or fail, I said, I'd like to teach a class at American University down the street for a semester, and he said yes, which along the lines of what I was trying to say before, if it's someone who just wants output or someone who just wants to do experiments, they would have said no, probably. But someone who's actually interested in what do you want to accomplish for your career, where do you want to go, he understood that I wanted to go to a teaching and research institution, and that's what I wanted to do for my career, and he gave me the opportunity to do that. I think I answered maybe 3/4 of your question, though. Was there something else? I'm sorry.
No, I think that's it. I mean, that's like your desire to teach is kind of get you out of the industry.
That's right. Now, my two younger sisters are definitely in industry, and they have PhDs. All right, so it's not just like genetic or anything. It's like, no problem.
I'll add that I'm pretty sure everybody up here had some sort of a plan, all right, but they were just flexible. So I think it'd be irresponsible to say, just go do what you're gonna do and it'll all fall. I think everybody, we're being maybe a little coy about it, but I think being flexible with and taking advantage of your opportunities, right? Was it luck favors the prepared mind, right? So you have an idea about where, but then opportunities come up and you have to weigh them and you have to say, should I take this opportunity to go do in this summer or not? I mean, my first real move into the academic medicine was because I happened to meet a guy that I didn't know that actually my grandfather was responsible for bringing into his career. The only reason I found out that was because I went to something like this and I came down and talked to him afterwards and he said, where do you live? And I said, Durham. And he said, well, and it just opened up from there. So I said, well, then maybe I should go because that sounds like it's going to work. So, but I think there's a plan. You have to be flexible and look at where your path is going. So I think the common thing is always, what's your 10-year plan? Right? No one knows what their 10-year plan is. Okay? And I'd be very interested to see, right? So in 5 years, maybe, right? But you got a 10-year wide swath, right? So.
Yeah. I'll add to that because I made it sound like I stumbled into things, which sometimes I did, but I was following my passion of research. But particularly now, and I'll just speak for people going into teaching and research, you have to have teaching experience. And so you have to, and I now mentor other people that are looking for teaching careers, and you have to weave that into what you're doing, and it becomes important as you do that. So some foresight to know a little bit about what you want is really good, because you do have to work towards that. But then keep yourself open to other opportunities that come around is very important as well. So thank you for that clarification.
I have a question for you guys, because I get this a lot. The value of post-bac research. So NIH has a really robust post-bac program. So you graduate college, and you can spend a year or two here. And I wonder if you would comment on if anyone on the panel did a post-bac. I'm not sure if it's a newer program then. I'm not saying you guys are old. And if you thought it was valuable, or if the students that have come through your programs, if you have a sense of whether maybe they were better prepared if they had gone through a post-baccalaureate program before heading to grad school?
I'll just start. I'm a basic neuroscientist, obviously. It seems most of the postbacks that come through our departments are ones that want to go to med school. So I think it helps solidify that. With that said, we've trained some people that weren't sure what they wanted to do in their life. And there are two people in particular that we taught them to do electrophysiology like we do, and they try to continue at that. So I guess if you want, or if you're a bit unsure to pad your CV, or you want to get experience in a lab, then I think there's spectacular possibilities. If you know exactly what you want to do, you probably don't want to delay for a year to go into graduate or medical school. I mean, that's just my take on it. I guess it just depends on what one wants to do. If it enhances your chance for going into like medical school, then you need to do that, because nowadays the opportunities are there and there's an expectation that you do them. In my day, they were much more of an exception, or there are not that many opportunities. But nowadays, I think it's sort of expected. So I guess it just depends on what it is that you want. They can be really valuable, and it's good to have that. And I see it helping a lot of people that are at transitions. So I think it's good to have as an option.
So just in terms of my own time, which was in this age was a long time ago, in those days, I think I mentioned the Vietnam War, but in those days, you could not take off time. If you took off time, you would be drafted. There was if you weren't in a program, you'd be off to Vietnam. We haven't had a draft in the United States for a long time, so that's not been an urgent thing, I guess, anymore. But that was a problem in the old days. So now post-bac is relatively common. I actually was just back to my 50th college reunion. That was an interesting experience. But I was talking to some of the undergraduates, and I was talking to someone who is going to be a senior, and she wanted to go to medical school. And I asked her, well, how often do people go right to medical school now as opposed to doing a post-bac? And she said virtually everybody takes a post-bac. It is almost no one who goes straight on to medical school. I was quite surprised at that, but that apparently is the common thing these days. And I suppose, and so in terms of the post-bacs that have been in our lab, I suppose at least half or maybe 3/4 of them have been planning to go to medical school. So it's a sort of an interim period in between college and going to medical school. And I think that people put off taking the MCATs until they're in the post-bac period. They don't do it right while they're in college. They may have to reorient themselves a little bit and think about what sort of field they might want to go into or something of that sort. So it gives a little more time to think after college, I guess, in that regard. So it is very popular to do. And but even if you go to graduate school, it's been worthwhile, and it does seem to help in terms of augmenting your experiences. That you have done more things, particularly in, if you could do a post-bac at NIH, it's certainly you do a lot more in the research arena, and that is appealing both for graduate school and medical school. So that is helpful, I guess, in getting into a good place. Most of the people have very good experiences with that, at least the ones that we've had. They all seem to have enjoyed it, and most people do, at the end of it, do decide to go to graduate school or medical school, and everything has gone very well. So it is a very popular thing to do now. And in relation to medical school, it seems to be almost a standard route, as far as I can see.
I would say as we interview neurosurgery residents coming in, I agree that it is overall more common, but I would guess that in the longer training persons who have decided that it might be less. So I would say in neurosurgery, not so much, right? I don't see that many. Now, what all of us say every year when the classes come through, we say, well, I didn't do any of that when I was in. So The scores are better, and the research topics and their knowledge is better. I agree also that post-bac used to be bad, right? I mean, it was like, oh, post-bac, right? That means you didn't get into medical school, right? And I would agree it's not that taboo anymore. And if you think that you need, we talked about street credit, right? If you need a little research street credit, that's what it is, right? So then that might be a different way to go about it. And I think with the current understanding of it, it's probably just fine. So, but it may help to know that you're going to do an additional 10 years after medical school if you want to add 2 more, right? So,
I guess. Cool. And the advice I give my students is basically it depends on who you are. And if you've waited your whole undergraduate career to get any research experience, then definitely it's probably a benefit. And they're usually very good experiences. But it also depends on, there are students who get involved in research from their sophomore year on and, may even have a couple publications under their belt before they even get to graduation. And so it really depends on what your vita looks like at that point, to know whether you need to do that or not. So it's something you can consider, but you should consider it as not just an absolute that, it's going to help you, because you might already have the credentials to be able to do those things already. And so it really depends on who you are and what your credentials are. And I always tell my students that, getting involved in research earlier is better than later. And that might keep you from having to add more years onto something by doing a post-bac or something like that. But especially if you can get publications out of it.
Question, yes.
Hi, so I actually have a question about residencies. Also, the average age at my medical school is 27, so it's true a lot of people wait a couple of years before going into medicine, so that's okay. And so my question about residency is, you hear that during residency, like 80 hours is like the average, or people do more than that. And I was wondering, specifically for Dr. Welch, when you're working for like 100, like almost 100 hours a week while doing surgery, like, isn't that like exhausting? Does that affect how well you can do in surgery? I mean, of course you learn more, and I hear that some people have even told me, they're like, even though you work over 70 hours, 70 hours a week, that there's still so much to learn, and I feel like that's just incredible how much time is spent doing that. So yeah, working 100 hours a week, how does it affect, actual surgery?
The way I think, so I had the fun of being out. My chief resident year was in 2000. I had the luxury of doing 2 chief years because, for different reasons, my co-chief disappeared. So, and so 2003 was when those residency hours, the 8 hours, went into effect. Now, just not to get too deep into it, but it's 80 hours, and then you're allowed to have 88 for crossover. All right. They just came out with the most recent data about. That whole thing came from the Institute of Medicine report, which said, 99,000 medical errors and all this type of stuff. And we all based that on the pilots, right? It's complete. Never mind. So they just came out with the most, they looked at error rate with this last generation, and there's no difference. No difference, right, in terms of medical errors in the 80-hour era versus the pre-80 hour. There's no difference at all. And that you can do all the stats you want. It just never really sat out. So a lot of us are saying, shocking, right, that it's actually came out. The way I think, and I'm not, there's no reason to be macho about it, right? If you're tired, and you move on, right? But it's like anybody swim? Okay. How many times do you practice for swimming? Right. Okay. At least, right? So, when I swam, it was 2 times a day. All right. How long is the meet? 2 minutes, right? Or whatever your speed is, right? So, then that's when you leave, there's no hours, right? So why should you have hours when you're training? Do you understand that? So when you leave and you go into practice, no one's going to say it's 80 hours. Go home. Right, and that my favorite saying, one of them is, sickness doesn't occur on the clock, right? You know, there's been many times I drive through my gate at home and I get a phone call. You home yet? Not yet. Okay, we got to come back. Turn. All right, that happens. Okay, not as much with residents there as it would if I was in private practice, right? But so I think you have to listen to yourself, okay, and you have to realize that this is it's a profession and you're training for it, all right, and part of that training is your mind and your body. So and certain people can do it and certain people can't. Okay, of the last 6 years of the residents that we've let go, 90% of them have gone into anesthesiology. Enough said, right? So. Yeah, no, but some people can't. I mean, we say you don't have the horsepower for it. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. I think we've said there's nothing wrong with that. But figure it out early, right? Don't figure it out when you're 7 years in.
Yeah, but I think that's, again, a difference between surgery and medicine, or neurosurgery and neurology, or something of that sort. I mean, the amount of time that it takes in those areas is much longer, and more time is spent in the hospital in those situations. Tell you a funny story. When I was a freshman medical student, I had an advisor who was a surgeon. He was in his first year out of residency, and he told us that in his residency, he spent a lot of time in the hospital. In fact, he said there was one time for 250 straight days that he never left the hospital. And he sort of said, well, this is just the way it is. The next year he became professor of pediatric surgery at Children's Hospital in Boston. Now, this was Judah Folkman. Does anyone know Judah Folkman? Judah Folkman died relatively recently. He was a marvelous surgeon and the inventor of VEGF and a variety of other interesting things. But he was a sort of a spectacular person that worked very hard. But actually, in the old days, people spent a very long time in the hospital, no matter what you were doing. And I know, at least from my own internship, I would say that I'm sure that a couple people died because I was half asleep. And I don't think that that's a good way of doing things. I think the number of hours that people put in now is much more sensible than what we used to do. So I think that times have changed in this regard, but there still is a substantial difference between surgery and medicine in this regard.
As I've watched the hours continue, okay, what it's done is it's streamlined. Now, a lot of that time spent in the hospital was just messing around, okay? You're developing relations. You could probably tell plenty of stories about what you did with your resident mates, right? And that's fine. That was fun part of it. But now it's much more streamlined. You get in, you get out. All right, and then your life it's much different. The medicine generally now is for better or for worse is much more pathway driven. Pathway driven. So now is that right? We're not all Yugos, right?
What do you mean by that?
You guys know what a Yugo is? So yeah, there's no not all patients are the same. Okay, so sometimes pathway, this could get into a whole different discussion, but what you're seeing now in medicine, especially in primary care, all right, is a lot of them are being replaced by what? Nurse practitioners, right? And if you're going to do the same that a nurse practitioner is going to do, then don't spend years in training. Be a nurse practitioner, right? Take care of the basics, all right? And then when there's more detailed stuff to deal with, what's going to happen? It's just a concern of mine long term. Is I think you have to spend the time up front. Now, in fairness, if you go overseas, okay, especially in the UK, the consultants are limited. They're not allowed to work but 45 hours a week. That's outside of training. All right, is that where we're going? I don't know, but I get into trouble because I don't think about the timing of it. Okay, and I do realize that it gets later, right? But now I've got kids at home. I'm going to see them. So and you balance that, but that's also a progression of your career.
So for the basic people, how long are your days? Wilson, how long are your days? Or Melissa?
It depends on the day. When I'm teaching a lot, my days can be quite long, particularly if I have to prepare for a lecture that I don't know anything about.
So what's a long day, though?
It could be 12, 13-hour day. Yeah. But then, you know, some days can be a lot shorter as well. So, yeah, there's still, I think it's a lot more that time, but you could still have long days in academics as well.
Stephen?
Yeah, I think, I mean, our days may not be as structured in terms of being there, but, I mean, I'll wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning with a thought in my head and have to go deal with it because I can't go back to sleep. And so, you know, am I scheduled to do that? No, but can I go back to sleep? No. So, I mean, you know, you can put in long days, you put in long hours, and there's times that you can't put your work aside, even if you may not be at work. So am I on campus 13 hours a day? Usually not, but am I thinking about things 13 hours a day? Probably, yeah. I mean, even, you know, and I get the same thing. I get it, you know, you know, my wife will sometimes say, you need to quit thinking about that, and, you know, you're here now. And I'm thinking about something that's going on, an issue that I'm thinking about in research. And I think that's part of what makes a good researcher, though, too, is like, you know, I'm problem-oriented. I hate going home if I have a problem that is not figured out. And my students laugh at me because I'll be late to class because I'm trying to figure out something that's going on here. And so it's not structured in the same way, but I think you can still put in the same amount of time, and it still can have the same sort of all-encompassing sort of effect on your life. So.
Wilson?
Yeah, I did. Okay. So one question that I've definitely gotten in the past 3 years being at George Mason is like, do you have the summers off? Right? You know, do you basically go on vacation and, you know, spend the month of what May to like August like basically just hanging out? And I don't know if I should speak for everyone, but to a certain extent, the things that we do, and I know this is going to sound weird, but you're somewhat obsessed with it. You know, it's like, so it's not. So you asked the question about like the hours, right, spent in. You don't think about the hours, really. And I know that sounds somewhat crazy, but you don't really think about like, you know, spending like 5 hours thinking about a problem, or, you know, maybe 8 hours, you know, well, maybe the grant writing, yes, but it's something that you're passionate about and something that you genuinely enjoy doing. So yeah, the days could, you know, vary from, you know, 13 hours of working with, you know, like you said, like not very structured possibly, but you enjoy doing it, and, you know, you find like it's 6 o'clock, and, you know, you've been spending all this time, you know, writing or thinking about something, and now it's time to go home and eat. So,
And you have to do that.
and you have to do that,
Right.
yes, right. And you have to hang out with your kids,
Yeah.
right? And you want to hang out with your kids. That's right. So, and you have to, yeah. But it's we're in weird. I don't know if we're in weird professions, but it's weird in the sense that it's not work all the time. So you don't really think about the time consumption, I guess. I forgot who asked the question actually. But yeah,
I-
but
Repeat it.
yeah.
I tell patients, I had to make myself start telling patients that everybody wants to know how long it's going to take, right? And everybody wants to, people want to get updates, right? And I've had to, what part of my pre-operative routine is to be very clear, I am not going to update you, all right? Now, I say that for two reasons. One, I lose track of time, right? It's, you know, it could be 3-4 hours, and I didn't know it was 3-4 hours. Only reason I know is because the scrub nurse is switching shifts. All right, that's when I figure out, okay, something's happening different. But the other thing is when you call out, what are you really gonna say? All right, it's going to hell in here. I'll call you out in a minute. No, right? So whatever I call out and say, it's gonna be a lie anyway, right? So I'm gonna say everything's going fine. So, so anyway, I think I think you do. It's again, I'll go back to the profession career thing, right? You know, we're in a profession. This is a part of your life. And it's because we're solving problems that affect people, one way or the other. If you enjoy doing that, you do it. If you think that, and there's nothing wrong with a 9 to 5. There's not many of those out there nowadays, right? But just have to know which it's really kind of knowing you. And that's part of this whole figuring out that's happening right now. So I'm not going to say find yourself. That sounds too cliche-ish, but I guess I did. So
Any questions? Yes, Catherine.
This question is again directly for Dr. Long. In the video you were showing, you also talked about how neurosurgery is going to be involved in more robotics, right, and more and newer technologies to do the work. So in the future, like when I get there, a while from now, how much of it will actually be manual? Like how much will we actually need surgery?
it's going to be a while. There's a couple ways to answer that. One, we have, so in that lab that we have, I designed space for simulation equipment to be there. We're actually in the throes of discussion right now. We actually have, the urologists and things use this robot called Da Vinci, right? That's a very common thing now in most large centers. There's a Da Vinci right next door, but it doesn't do the level of smallness that we need, all right? The micro motions that you need. It's going to be a while on that. I think there are things like deep brain stimulation, all right, that is very robotic nowadays, right? It's all based on coordinates, and you're just following. Some people do it with microelectrode listening to things. Okay, some people don't. But I think there's always going to be not always, but in your time, you may get to the point, be my guess, where you're doing less. But even the minimally invasive stuff I do, all right, when I thought that when I did endovascular, when I decided to make that jump, that was going to be my out if I lost an eye, if I lost a hand. You need all of that. Even though I'm doing this on a screen, okay, you still need all of that to make those decisions, okay? And I think in a lot of simulation and artificial intelligence, all this discussion that's going on, it's not just the movement, it's the decision to make the movement for what steps. They put EEGs and they monitored some surgeons at one point looking at the brain electrical activity that's going on while you're doing that. And there's a lot of other stuff going on in the background. I can be sitting still, for 6 hours. Now my butt hurts, okay? All right, but I'm also beat, all right? And some of that's not just because I was moving my hands. It's because I was thinking about next steps and what if I did this and what if I did that, and all those things are going through your mind. So short answer is you still need a brain.
Yeah, I sort of give a more general answer to that. I think that looking forward, one of the things that you should be thinking about is that there's going to be constant change, that virtually nothing is going to be the same in the future than it is now. When I was in college, computers were very rare. We did most of our calculation with slide rules. I started neurology, there was no CT scan, yet alone MRI scan. And the changes that have occurred over my career have been enormous. And what we know is that change is happening faster and faster all the time. It's not slowing down. It's faster and faster. So that it's hard even to imagine what research of any type is going to be like, or medical practice of any type, or surgery of anything is going to be like 10, 20, 30, 40 years from now. It's almost unimaginable. You don't know where things are going to be happening and changing. So you have to be prepared for change. And in relation to robotic surgery, for example, well, it's already started. So it's going to be accelerating like mad, for sure. I mean, there are certain things that you can predict. That's going to be happening. But you have to be prepared for all sorts of changes. You just have to keep on rolling with the punches and moving with the new things. But things will not be the same that they are now. That's for sure.
And in fairness, I didn't have a cell phone in residency, right? had one, but it wasn't what you guys have access to now, right? I still had a pager, and when that pager went off, I had to be close to the hospital, right? Now I can pull this up. I can right now see what's going on in my angio suite right now from here, right? And that's just, it's gonna, now I can't do it, right? But I can precept it. And I think if we're gonna make any predictions, I would tell you the patient's gonna be a lot more involved in the care they receive, okay? Which means you're gonna get checked a lot more than I am, right? And it's probably not the patient. It's, I think, Big Brother is probably about how many years late, right? 1984. So, I mean, you're gonna be much more regulated in terms of medicine. But I think that's all the more important that you are enjoying that interaction. And I think the patient, I think both of us have said it, the patient interaction is something it's very rewarding. Okay, you don't have to go into medicine because you want to help people. That's, again, very cliche-ish. But I think you go into a health career, and it's across the board, because you want to improve things. So, and that can be improve someone's quality of life. That can be improve the techniques that are being brought to patients, right? I think that's why you do it. And if you feel comfortable saying that, then you move on, right?
I'll just follow up with that, obviously not as a neurologist, but for medically based, but also for basic science research, not knowing what's ahead of you. And I just had a conversation with a former student who's now in graduate school, and she was worried about what she should do as a graduate student, in her career as a graduate student. And she said, because optogenetic, you can do so much with optogenetics. And I was just thinking, that's really new. I mean, we've been really using it 7 years, something like that. I mean, when I started, that was no one ever thought of that, even when I was in graduate school. And now it's just the thing that everyone uses. And, so I sort of pointed that out to her. I'm like, well, but you don't know in 5 or 10 years what's going to happen. So again, you just have to kind of do what you can and know it's going to change and be ready for the change.
It's a real good book. It's worth reading. It's probably old now, but even though it's just hit paperback, it's called Bold. It's probably not a bad read for answering questions like that. Just kind of understanding change and understanding ways to predict things based on trends. And it's I forget who the author is. I can give it to you, but.
Okay, any more questions? Okay, so I think we're going to wrap up. And we have parting gifts for our contestants. Vivian? Okay, so I want to give a round of applause to our panelists, please, for taking time to talk to you guys. I think it's hugely important and valuable. And don't forget who these people are. Vivian and Mary will get their information out to you so that you can follow up and continue to build a relationship and network, because we know that's hugely, hugely important.